Hello and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not the Mouse, the podcast all about animation not made by the mouse. I'm your host, Octaviano, and today it's one of those other episodes where I'm not talking about a specific movie or anything. I'm just talking about, in this case, isn't it kind of weird how a lot of people just love, and I have to emphasize this, just love to make Disney the center of animation. I mean, I get why. Disney is the biggest name in animation in terms of how long they've been doing animated movies. The fact that they had some really big hits, they've had the biggest hits, and for years they were pretty much the person that people were following. That I understand, but there are other people in the animation game now, and it's weird that there's still a lot of animation fans that pretty much look at everything like, okay, until Disney does it, that's when it really matters. Before we get started, I just want to say, if you're listening to this on YouTube, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe to the channel, feel free to comment, and ring the bell for notifications. Also, if you're on Spotify or just any other podcast site, follow this show on those platforms. So, what I'm really getting at here is that when you look at other industries, you can see that the fans of those industries, pretty much look to different people. Like, if you're into gaming, for example, yeah, of course, Nintendo may be the face of gaming because, they have Mario, they have a lot of iconic characters, but you still have people going at, say, Xbox or PlayStation, looking at them, pretty much on the way they do things. And it doesn't have to be a studio that makes consoles specifically. It could be studios that make games. There's different genres of gaming. Sure, there's something like, the one that came to mind was Metrovania, which, yeah, the first part of that comes from a Nintendo franchise, but the second part, the Castlevania part of the Metrovania, is from Konami. So, you have different companies that inspire these things. And this isn't to say that studios themselves only look at Disney to inspire, but I am really talking about the fans here. You got a lot of people who want 2D back, but when they say that, and I've said this before on the show, what they really mean is that they want Disney 2D back. Because there are 2D animated films getting released, usually by indie studios or foreign films, and yeah, sure. I would like to see more 2D films from Disney, but at the same time, it's like, look, these aren't here. Maybe support them. Maybe one of the other studios will pick it up, like Sony or Warner Bros. Animation or whoever. And speaking of Sony, we've had Spider-Verse really shake up the industry in terms of how we animate these things. Like, you got a lot of animated films now looking much more stylized than they ever did before. And again, for a lot of animation fans, it's like, oh yeah, this thing doesn't matter until Disney does it, because they didn't consider it a big deal until they saw something like Wish do it, and, Wish was done horribly. I mean, look, if you like it, fine, whatever, but I personally didn't like it, and while I do think the animation on it was nice, it was definitely far from the best looking stylized animation. I mean, I think pretty much every other studio did this better. And that's generally my thing. It's just like, why are there so many people who cling on to Disney as the important one? I mean, obviously it's because they're Disney fans, but at the same time, it's like, look, if you consider yourself an animation fan, not just a Disney fan, like you really do think animation is that important, just why do you keep on just going back to the one company? And the obvious answer is because you're mostly a Disney fan, sure, but I just feel like if you're doing these things, if you're saying that this is so important to you, maybe for just a second, consider that if you truly are more than just that you at least acknowledge when other studios do these things and support them every bit as much as you support Disney. Like, it's just frustrating, me personally as an animation fan, because it's like I see all these people and they talk about like, oh, this is what I want, this is what I think, but it's all like it's always going back to that one company. And even if you acknowledge the other companies, it's like, yeah, they did it, but it's not a real achievement until Disney does it. And I'm like, sooner or later they're not gonna be top dog anymore. I mean, maybe they always will be, who knows, but there are more studios now than there was a few decades ago, and they all have their own identities now. They all have their own pieces of work, and sure, maybe they don't have the long history that Disney does. I mean, look, if I'm completely honest, my favorite animated films are Disney films. I mean, I love Fantasia, and then there's, of course, if we're gonna include anything Disney owns, Wall-E is probably my favorite movie of all time. But I acknowledge, like, okay, but they're not the only company out there, and I'm just glad that there's anyone innovating. I mean, in terms of Western studios doing 2D, I don't know if this is counting as a Sony animation or Sony's just distributing it, but regardless of it, Sony is going to be releasing a 2D feature in the near future with Gendy Tartakovsky's Fixed. It's a movie that they've been talking about for years. I thought it was coming out last year at some point, but I guess not. I'm not sure if it's coming out this year, but it is coming. And even if it gets delayed until, next year, I guarantee you it's likely coming out before Disney even considers touching 2D again. Because realistically, the last time Disney actually touched 2D without doing any kind of stylized CG stuff was their Once Upon a Studio short. And that's only because they wanted to recreate the 2D animated films that they had. And I mean, that's great, but give me something that is fully 2D animated, and then we'll talk. That sounded a bit silly, but, again, like it is like, oh, look, every studio deserves their due, and if Disney isn't delivering on that, but someone else is, give them respect. I mean, come on, guys, it's not that complicated. Personally, I just feel like, as much as I love Disney, part of the reason why I did the show was to kind of, well, one, promote other stuff, but also just to kind of step aside and acknowledge, like, look, they ain't the only animators in town. I love their work. I respect them, and I think they should do more than what they've done. But at some point, you have to acknowledge, like, well, there is always going to be limitations, and if other studios are stepping up to do what they want, support them. I wish Disney would step up and do it, but then again, if they don't want to, there's nothing I can really do on that. And I don't know, I just feel like there's no reason for me to demand them to do a thing that they're not gonna do. As much as I may want to, but, I don't know. It's pretty much like, look, don't expect an R-rated animated feature from Disney. Don't expect them to revive 2D. Don't expect them to create the next big thing in animation. And maybe they do that last one, but one, I wouldn't hold my breath. Not because I have anything personal against Disney. It's just that since it is a studio, it is so deeply entrenched into, like, what their investors want. I mean, it's always possible that they could do something, but it's also very likely that they're gonna try to avoid that, because even at their most extreme, when it comes to, like their most radical animated films of the last few decades, they've still kind of been held back by whatever their investors want. And this isn't to knock any of them. I mean, I love stuff like The Lion King and Frozen, but they still, again, were held back to some extent by whatever investors wanted. That they broke the mold so much isn't so much that there were these radical things. It's just, I don't know, like, I don't want to say it just kind of happened, but it is kind of noticeable that, when it came to those two movies, there were movies that the studio itself wasn't even trying to do much with, whereas the movies where they try to do something big and bold, like their 100th anniversary or their first official foray into CG with Chicken Little, it's always noticeable that those are usually bigger messes. Like, even something like Pocahontas, they wanted it to be like their big Oscar feature, and, well, we know the story on that. So, I don't know. If Disney does make it, it's probably going to be something that they're not even, kind of focused on. It's just something that kind of sneaks up on them. But they don't have to do that. I mean, they could just make entertaining movies, and that'll still be enough. My general point isn't to knock them because I want them to make the movies that I want to see. I mean, I would want them to make movies that are at least entertaining, but my general thing is just like, there are other studios that exist, and they're gonna do the things that Disney won't, and that's okay. If Disney only wants to do a certain type of movie, that's perfectly fine. I mean, as long as it's entertaining, I won't be really too bothered. Like, I will always kind of wonder, like, hey, what if they did this or that? But that some people expect them to actually someday do it, or pretty much ignore the movies that do that kind of stuff just because Disney isn't doing it. I mean, that's kind of silly. I mean, again, if you're into animation, I want to see more stuff for adults, but feel like animation hasn't delivered in that front. It's like, look, there's foreign movies, there are adult animated features coming out, whether it's like, almost a decade ago now, you had Sausage Party, or on one of the streaming sites like Netflix and whatnot, they do have like their more adult oriented animation. Um, you know, acknowledge those, support those. Why wait until Disney does their first R-rated movie, which probably won't happen in our lifetime. Maybe it will. Who knows? It was crazy when they did a PG-13 movie with Pirates of the Caribbean, but they've never done a PG-13 animated film that's directly from them. So, there is still that limitation. And, out of nowhere, they're doing an R-rated Marvel movie this year. So, again, maybe they finally get around to doing, even just a PG-13 animated film, or they decide to do an R-rated one. I would like to see that. I wouldn't mind, but I'm not gonna be waiting for it. If it happens, it happens. It'll be cool. But in the meantime, since I know other people are doing it, I have no issue supporting them, and you shouldn't either. That pretty much wraps up my whole thing. Yeah, it's a short episode this week. Thank you for listening. See you again next time. Bye. Thanks for stopping by. Go ahead and follow this channel. Subscribe, like, and comment. Ring the bell for notifications. Go ahead and also follow my podcast, and give some love to my Patreon account while you're at it. It's www.patreon.com/saicams. Again, thanks for stopping by, and I hope you come back for more in the future.